welcome to this episode of Vaartaalaap. Good to see you after very long. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Aman. Good to see you as well. It's really been a very long time. Happy
Yes,
to meet you. How are you doing as well?
doing great. So, for my listeners, Sundar has over 14 years of research, engineering, and product development experience, mostly around information extraction and data analysis in web and mobile search. He is currently working as a senior data scientist at DataWeave in Bangalore. Anything that you wish to add to your profile, Sundar?
Pretty much it sums up. I've been considerably an information extraction engineer for the most of my career, but I
Mhm.
also dabbled into a little what I call as adjacent areas, and now
Okay.
I'm trying to do more with text in database. Yeah.
Okay, so you have worked with a lot of top companies in terms of be it Facebook, Yahoo, as well as some startups as well. What has given you most satisfaction, Sundar, across your 14 years? Which company and which area of work?
It's a really tough question to answer.
Okay.
I feel that it deserves a slightly longer answer than just a name and period, because there is some context around it.
Mhm.
As a general clarification, what I would
Mhm.
say is uh, there are certain good things about big companies, large scale, and so on. There are certain other good things about startups and so on.
Mhm.
But then each experience has been really unique,
Okay.
and so which is why I hesitate to just say which one is the best, right? Because it also depends on what aspect of it. But I think just to give a shorter answer, I would still think my work at Yahoo was really satisfying, partly because it
Mhm.
was my first serious job, and after masters I just joined there as an intern and so on. There was a lot of learning and accompanied by big scale,
Mhm.
great team, and all that. But subsequently, of course, at Ziva, again, the same kind of depth, but with
Mhm.
far more constraints of a startup, early
Mhm.
stage startup, and a far more closely knit team.
Mhm.
Again, I valued that a lot. I learned quite a bit there. And the last part is running my own startup.
Mhm.
That was a challenge of its own
Yeah.
kind, and
Yeah.
it came with a lot of unique experiences and lots of ups and downs, and those I enjoyed as well. Of course, all the other companies where I've worked and I'm still working have all been really good to me in various ways, but these three I would kind of call out as some of the best ones.
Okay, so you have seen the global product ecosystem to some extent, Sundar. There are these big behemoths: Facebook, Google, Yahoo, Apple. Why is it that something like that has not come out from Indian ecosystem, especially in Bengaluru? So there have been companies which are more or less copies. So there you have had Flipkart, Snapdeal, Oyo coming out, but they are replicas. Why, when, and why are we not seeing something like a Facebook or a Google coming up out of Indian ecosystem from a product
Got it.
perspective?
Got it. So, yeah, that's a really intriguing question, and I've been thinking about it on and off for some time. So the thing is, I mean, as for, I'm at the outset. Let me say that I'm fairly positive we'll get there.
Mhm.
The when and why and how we'll get to it in a bit. So one thing is, in terms of potential, we have like immense potential, right? As in, all these behemoths you stated, they basically literally stood on the shoulders of a lot of Indians working for these companies, right?
Yeah.
Either in their own companies or offshore here and so on.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt about the potential or capability and so on. Then it comes to market readiness and so on, right? That's where the timing comes into picture. So I mean, we know there's a long history we have had as a country and so on, and due to various reasons, there was a kind of, I can't call it a stolen generation, but there was a phase we missed in terms of progress due to colonial history and a lot of our own internal issues. But
Yeah.
then that also meant it doesn't have to be that bad, in the sense that uh, we didn't simply keep on lagging. Rather, we just skipped a phase and then entered the mobile ecosystem with a
Yeah.
bang, right?
Yeah.
So that way, I'm fairly positive and optimistic that we'll have our time very soon. And now, to your question on why it hasn't happened, there are two reasons. One was the market readiness aspect, which we are getting there, as in
Mhm.
we have a good and healthy middle class market, which is kind of mature enough, and also progress across the board. And then of course there are access initiatives and so on, which makes
Mhm.
more people on board, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
was at Facebook when I think the Geo free plan came up, and
Yeah.
the charts just swung, right? As in,
Yeah.
overnight, within a couple of weeks, India became the most monthly active people countries,
Yeah.
beating US.
Yeah.
And people were following it very eagerly and so on. Even
Yeah.
after the free plan was lifted, people saw value
Yeah.
in remaining online, regardless of which company they are connected to,
Yeah.
and so on. So there is the market is kind of at the right time.
Mhm.
And but why haven't we tapped it, right? I think that's your question itself had part of the answer,
Yeah.
which is that we have been trying to imitate or copy the Western successful
Yeah.
products,
Yeah.
which is okay. I mean, we should also do that to some extent wherever the same need exists.
Yeah.
But then we should also try and look at our own local problems and solve those in our own unique ways. And
Yeah.
that is when we create a true behemoth, Indian behemoth. It won't probably look like Facebook,
Yeah.
but then it would be equally impactful in terms of revenue, in terms of number of people touched, in
Mhm.
terms of the problem it solves, and so on, or even better, actually.
Mhm.
So I would just try to motivate with a little example, right? So when we think of problem areas or solutions targeting at different markets, we would, let's say, I mean, prior to COVID, at least, we would have ranked frequent flyers as a good market and so on,
Yeah.
right? But then we hardly realize that there are about 8 billion plus rail trips undertaken in India every year, which
Mhm.
is like a humongous thing. I don't know if all of Europe has that many
Mhm.
trips, right?
Yeah.
And so but then it's very easily overlooked by most
Mhm.
Indian startups. I mean, there are some reasons also. There is some friction in working in this space and so on.
Mhm.
But then when we started Ideaphone, we were looking at some commuter solutions for Indian rail passengers. Almost everybody discouraged us. I mean, they said, like,
Mhm.
you guys have come from like global internet companies and so on. Why don't you
Mhm.
look at more attractive markets? But then we stuck with that, and then we proceeded to a good extent. And then, of course, we had our own reasons that it didn't work out.
Mhm.
But then it was a question of timing and so on. But then I still remain convinced that that's the kind of market which is untapped for Indian startups, right?
Yeah.
Imagine whatever little ARPU you have for one rail trip, uh,
Mhm.
the number really becomes huge, right?
Yeah, you're right. So in railways, we are seeing that entry of private players pretty soon. So you are right. That's an untapped market. There is a lot to be done in that. But you hinted at something, India's missed opportunity. Were you referring to the semiconductor part, the electronics
Yes.
manufacturing that we missed completely?
Both, I mean, so yes, semiconductors and the associated ecosystem things
Yeah.
around that. I mean,
Yeah.
both on the hardware side and the software side, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so the whole .com and I mean that came slightly later, but like you said, the original origin was in the semiconductor
Yeah.
itself and so on, which is what made a difference in, let's say, Southeast Asia or
Yeah.
China or other places
Yeah.
versus India. But then again, like I said, with mobile, we pretty much caught up both on the hardware manufacturing side
Yeah.
to some degree, to a very good extent, I guess,
Yeah.
and also on the tech side,
Yeah.
the software tech and the application layer of it, and so
Yeah.
on. Now, so I think we are on for a good
But one thing, but what you think is happening or has happened is in terms of product marketing. So while we
run.
were studying, Ramco is a very good example I talk about. Ramco is a very big brand name in product which a lot of Indians do not know about. It's a ERP used by a lot of global airports as well. Then there was, when we were studying, there was something called as Pramati Studio, which we were using for EJBs and all. And
Yeah.
that product was a competitor for WebLogic, WebSphere, Apache,
Yes.
and then it sank. Do you think that product marketing is still lacking in the country? We lack on that?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, you bring out very good, interesting examples. I'll come to that. And to your question, yes, we did have a considerable gap in that. Which the good thing is, which is now changing for the better now, and to a large extent, that's kind of mitigated.
Hmm.
And to speak of Ramco, my very first job was in a Ramco Cements plant
Okay.
before my masters,
Okay.
and we were implementing Ramco ERP in the cement plant.
Hmm.
And so yes, I mean we that was a very early time, and then we kind of lost out. Even most Indians don't know about the ERP side of things, and
Yeah.
so on. Likewise, the Pramati Studio. I mean, those are really amazing products, and with a lot of potential.
Yeah.
We didn't get too far. Unlike, let's say, some equivalent de facto standards we have now. The reason used to be that we were very removed from the overall larger market,
Yeah.
but yet we were targeting that market, right?
Hmm.
So, and see, one for to some extent, the domestic market was smaller at that stage. So we were kind of right in targeting the global market, but then we were also removed from there.
Hmm.
That was a cause of an issue. But then so and also, like I mentioned, we were looking at their problems, a lot of their problems, some of which is shared by the rest of India as well.
Hmm.
So but now things have changed in many ways. The reason is, first of all, location ceased to become a big issue. The world
Hmm.
has become smaller and closer.
Yeah.
Second, there's a lot of movement of people, like people who have worked elsewhere, they have come back to India to set up
Hmm.
companies or lead organizations and so on, which
Yeah.
brings this best practices from elsewhere also inside.
Right.
That's the other thing. And then the third thing is that the ecosystem has also changed dramatically. So,
Yeah.
which means a lot of these things are now more feasible. Sitting in Bangalore, sitting in Coimbatore, you can basically pretty much have access to all the kind of lectures or demos or like accelerator programs, virtual
Yeah.
ones, and
Yeah.
all that, and so on. So people do get all the learnings and so on. Back
Yeah.
when we used to run startups, even the lean startup model was more like a thing which was known to a few people who have
Yeah.
had multinational exposure. So
Sure.
now that playing field is leveled up. So I think we should no longer have that excuse and just go
Yeah.
after good products.
Sure. So we are living in a technology age. There is artificial intelligence, there is machine learning, big data, Internet of Things, blockchain, and cloud, which has become very pervasive. So, what do you think would probably be the success factor for success technology for next 10, 15 years? Is it a combination of these, or we are looking at growth into every technology per se?
I would definitely say that it's a combination, but a combination of some of these in to a larger extent than some other things.
Okay.
I mean, definitely. See, uh, I mean, there was some self-help post which I read. I forget who it was attributed to, where they say, "Don't just install a habit; install an ecosystem of habits." That's
Mm-hmm.
when it becomes sustained, right?
Yeah.
It's almost similar to that. Usually, no technology stands on its own to succeed. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of relies on the presence of other things.
Mm-hmm.
To that extent, of course, I also have a vantage point to a certain field more than certain other things. Let's say IoT and so on.
Yeah.
I don't actively work on those.
Mm-hmm.
However, from my vantage point, I would say a combination of cloud plus machine learning is going to kind of change things dramatically. Uh,
Okay.
so, so just I mean, it may be a slightly longer answer, but I want to also trace some of the evolution of
Sure.
internet technologies, right?
Yeah.
So, uh, in around 2003, when I joined Yahoo as an intern, uh,
Mm-hmm.
there there was basically hardly any place where people can any general person can post their content, right?
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, your typing was limited to email.
Yeah.
Everything else you were consuming, unless you are a developer, right?
Yeah.
Or a publisher as a website,
Yeah.
uh, which we so take it for granted today.
Yeah.
In fact, they started a novel team called user generated content, trying to
Mm-hmm.
promote it and so on
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
that stage. This is when like there were 3 billion page views a day, but still
Mm-hmm.
no user generated content. Now
Mm-hmm.
we simply take it for granted, right? As in,
Yeah.
like, everywhere, like, be it on Twitter in small form, Facebook, and blogging,
Mm-hmm.
video blogging, like, like my 11-year-old son, he is able to just upload his like whatever robotics project output into YouTube, and then his friends run YouTube channels and whatnot, right? So that has been a dramatic shift. And when we say cloud, we the engineers normally think of Azure or AWS and so on,
Yeah.
which also have changed the ecosystem dramatically.
Yeah.
But the fact that everything lives in the cloud and
Mm-hmm.
be accessible to all and one and all has
Mm-hmm.
made a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of it, of course, AWS, because I mean, uh, like Ziva, when we started Ziva, AWS was still new, but
Mm-hmm.
without that, you wouldn't have conceived of an idea like that, because you can't own hardware, you can't put them in like like the internet data centers and all that. It would be impossible for startups.
Mm-hmm.
That also got changed. Now, coming to the
Okay.
future, right? Now, this combined with the capabilities of machine learning, like every day
Mm-hmm.
things are coming, right? The GPT and whatnot,
Yeah.
T5 and Facebook News and things like that. It's very hard for me to keep up to date. A lot of these open source technologies, which enable machine learning like anything, will enable a lot of products on one hand. But what I see, which will make even more profound effect, is not just enabling products. Imagine a world where there was no spreadsheets, right? Excel and whatnot.
Yeah.
We would have done most things with paper and calculators and so on.
Yeah.
So obviously, it limits it to a certain small domain of people like accountants and so on to be able to
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
Today, anybody can open a Google spreadsheet and then
Yeah.
run basic things like average and whatnot and so on,
Yeah.
standard deviation, or even complex things.
Yeah.
Now, imagine machine learning being available in such a simple form to
Yeah.
anybody.
Sure.
So, like the other day, we were discussing like which movies to watch and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm not very much into movies and pop culture, so then my son needed recommendations, and then I was thinking maybe like let's index IMDb plot summaries.
Yeah.
Let me search for a certain kind of plot and
Yeah.
then get recommendations. Right
Yeah.
now, right now it is within the reach of an engineer, but
Mm-hmm.
then imagine that will be within the reach of anybody who can access a computer or a device.
Yeah.
That can change things dramatically, is what I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that those are great perspectives. So moving a little bit away from the technology part of it, you are a linguist as well, and you are doing a lot of things on Wikipedia. How did that journey start for you?
Yeah, that's something very I'm very passionate about. I wouldn't call myself a linguist, though. You've
Okay.
been more generous.
Okay.
But I do call myself a quasi linguist. I mean, it's
Okay.
like you're always almost there and never reach
Okay.
the ideal state. So, but then, yeah, I mean, I'm very much interested into languages, and I've picked up some languages apart from my mother tongue, which is Tamil.
Sure.
But then, coming to your question on Wikipedia itself. So during our master's program, Professor Srinath taught us theory of computing,
Yeah.
and he taught us the context-free grammars and so on.
Yeah.
And after the class, we were having some freewheeling discussion, and then I recognized that meter in a certain kind of Tamil poetry
Hmm.
follows a CFG. So
Okay.
that kind of set me off in a very different path, actually.
Okay.
Then I worked with Sanjeet and Ishwar to
Okay.
develop that idea. We developed a grammar and parser, and we published the paper and so on. Now, then I just was searching for more information around CFGs and so on.
Hmm.
I landed on the Wikipedia page of CFGs,
Hmm.
and then I realized that, oh, okay, anybody can edit. There's a
Hmm.
cool edit function. I didn't create an account at that stage, and then
Hmm.
I added a link to our paper in a relevant paragraph,
Yeah.
which in today's context and even back then is basically forbidden. Basically, for anybody with a, I mean, it's basic conflict of interest, right?
Okay.
Me adding a link to my own paper, but I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of what Wikipedia was and so on. So I
Yeah.
in wiki communities, I introduced myself as a former vandal.
Okay.
But but then, yeah, I didn't intend to do that
Sure.
in a bad way. But then there was a very good Wikipedian who told me and explained why this is an issue and so on.
Hmm.
He encouraged me to create an account. I removed it myself and then started becoming a good Wikipedian, editing
Okay.
a lot around Indian languages and India on English Wikipedia to start with.
Okay. Okay.
And then, but then interestingly, a German linguist who was also a Wikipedian added our paper to the same article himself. There was no
Okay.
conflict of interest,
Right.
which kind of vindicated the original ad.
Yeah.
But then at a certain point in time, people nominated me for an adminship in English Wikipedia,
Okay.
and another linguist from Germany, again for whatever reason, he said, you are most required in Tamil Wikipedia. There's such a
Hmm.
thing there. I
Hmm.
didn't know at that time, so
Hmm.
I just went and looked. Back then, there was just one editor, Mayuranathan, who was editing. I
Hmm.
just started helping him around, and
Yeah.
then for the next 15 years or so, I was editing both English and Tamil Wikipedia. I have done
Hmm.
quite a bit of volunteering. Tried to set up I mean, was part of the founding team of Indian Wikimedia chapter,
Okay.
and have done some studies and kind of helped in framing the strategy for
Hmm.
Wikimedia Foundation globally. One thing I'm kind of proud of is uh, due to some of the papers from me as well as a few others from India,
Hmm.
Wikimedia Foundation itself realized that this global south had a great potential, and they started having a separate strategy for that and so on.
Okay.
So and that set me off down the language path. I went on to pick up a few more languages to some degrees and so on. So
Okay.
yeah.
Great. So since we are on languages, let me ask you: a new educational policy has come out, and that's talking about a three-language policy. How do you see, especially coming from a Tamil-speaking state, how what's your personal opinion on that?
Yeah, it's a little. I know it's a little hard to have a very simplistic opinion on such a major thing, and of course it's also a little controversial and so
Hmm.
on for various reasons.
Hmm.
There are many parts to it. So let's first. I mean, I have my own perspectives and bias, and like you said, from a certain I mean, from a Tamil speaking perspective as well.
Yeah.
But before that, just looking at the policy alone,
Yeah.
regardless of the background and circumstances and who brought it and so on, there are some good elements, which is the primary education should be in the mother tongue or the local language and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And then subsequently you introduce additional languages at a very
Yeah.
broad level. That's a step in the right direction. Right. But then that said, my concerns are slightly different regardless of the merit of the policy itself, which is that education originally was a predominantly state subject, right? And then it gradually moved into the concurrent space, and then it kind of got into an unwritten understanding that the central or federal jurisdiction will be more in the higher education, and the state jurisdiction will be more in the primary and secondary education. Now that balance is now tilting, right? So I'm conflicted that even assuming this is the best policy possible, right, for a moment, now this sets a precedent. Now what stops a future federal government from introducing something which is not acceptable to many individual states for a variety of reasons, but because this precedent exists? So that is one concern I have, regardless of the merit of the policy. Now, the second part is about the three language formula itself, right?
Yeah.
It has been a lot of controversial thing. You know the background as well
Yeah.
a lot. The position. It's a difference in perspective, right? As in, like, let's say if I was from Bihar or Madhya Pradesh and so on, or even Rajasthan, for me, learning Hindi is like probably not a big deal. It's just another related language and so on. And also, there are more chances of me using it.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody in Tamil Nadu probably doesn't. I mean, I learned Hindi for like 10 years outside school in Dakshin Bharat Hindi Prachar Sabha, right? And spent more effort than I put to learn Tamil. But the thing is, when I had to use it, you didn't have that like what is it, the context and usage
Yeah.
and people around you using it. So it wasn't all that useful. Whereas there were a few friends who just learned Hindi from Bollywood movies. So
Okay.
my point is that picking up additional languages should be optional and based on need, and it should be more or less symmetric in the sense that there should be more encouragement for more of Indian languages to be learned, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you go to Kolar, people there speak Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada with equal elan and fluency that you can't even guess their mother tongue.
Yeah.
So people do pick up maybe 6 languages. I mean, there was a person from Rajasthan who spoke 8 languages, and I couldn't guess his true mother tongue.
Yeah.
So, but then all that cannot be policy. But when you frame policy, these things should be clearly optional. And also, in the interest of greater cohesion, there should be more of these languages introduced in other parts of the country as well.
Yeah.
Imagine in Punjab, some people learn Telugu. In
Yeah.
Assam, some people learn Kannada, and somebody else learns in Tamil. Right?
You picked my thought. I'll interrupt you there because I'll let you speak. I come from a Hindi speaking state, and when I've worked in Tamil Nadu, I've worked in studied in Bangalore, I was in Pune, I was in Bengal, but I have not picked up the languages beyond few words or syllables. What I felt from coming from a Hindi speaking state was we are starved of learning our own Indian languages. So apart from Hindi, at least we should be taught, and it's up to somebody's choice whether they want to learn Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, Marathi, Bengali, but that there should be emphasis on that. What we are teaching our students is foreign languages. I went to Germany, I had to learn the language to survive. That doesn't happen in India. So there has to be some sort of incentive which is developed, especially in Hindi speaking states, that you have to learn maybe an Assamese or a Manipuri. You have a tableau of languages. You need to learn one more additional Indian language. So that should have been part of the education policy. I don't know how far that is getting channelized in this education policy. Now you Tell me your opinion on that.
No, I totally agree with you on what you said, and it's good to hear from your perspective, coming from a person who comes from a North Indian state,
Yeah.
Hindi-speaking state, and so on. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree. That would create far greater cohesion. In fact, when you mentioned Tamil-speaking state, I think there's also a lot of background attached to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many people know, right? There is
Yeah.
even a constitutional exception to on the language policy for the
Yeah.
state due to a lot of history.
Yeah.
But then, and then, in fact, there is also some amount of stereotype I see in certain circles. I mean, I'm sure not you, where people see, for instance, Tamil people as less nationalistic and so on.
No, no, no. That's not
And
true.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you don't agree, but
Yeah.
I'm just stating it
Yeah.
for completion.
Sure.
But then what people don't realize is there was this movie called Vaartaalaap
Hmm.
in Tamil, and you have this song where basically there's a house, huge house, mansion, and a lot of tenants are there. Each
Hmm.
of them is from a different state in India, and then
Yeah.
they celebrate the unity, and it's a very multilingual song.
Yeah.
And that is the idea of India people in Tamil Nadu look forward to. It's not like
Yeah.
they are not nationalistic. They have a specific idea of India, which is incidentally aligned with the original idea of India when the freedom movement itself happened, right?
Hmm.
Which is the misconception in some cases, which also leads to these so on. And I think, regardless of what individual circles think of or perspectives, like you said, it's good for us to learn each other's languages
Yeah.
and have a
Yeah.
more very nice, diverse mosaic of anything.
Surely. I mean, I personally feel that people I come across in southern parts or even eastern parts or sometimes in western part, they are far ahead because they learn 2 to 3 languages. I rely only on Hindi or English. I should also have an opportunity to be able to learn other Indian languages. That should be there. There can be a connecting language, and we can have different arguments against it, whether Hindi is that connecting language for the entire country or not. But at least
Mm,
even in Hindi states, there has to be a very big focus on teaching Indian languages. So something like on that has to be done as part of education
yeah,
policy.
I'm
So
totally
moving
agree.
ahead from the language, one last question. You are a very passionate camera photographer as well. Now, where did that come from? I have seen your pictures; they are very well entrenched. You spend a lot of time clicking them. How did that passion start for you?
Oh, yeah, that's another thing I enjoy. That's kind of my hobby. I mean, although people see a lot of my photographs, I would say that I'm more of a documenter of the wildlife than
Okay,
a photographer. The
okay,
difference is that I didn't come into this from the photography angle. I didn't even
okay,
have a camera when I started this.
okay.
So I basically grew up in a village near Madurai, which had a lot of native wildlife.
Yeah.
I always was drawn towards uh, wildlife there, and that I continued after coming to Bangalore as well,
Mhm.
exploring the forest areas around and even urban wildlife.
True.
You wouldn't. It's very hard to believe. I found the remains of a python in our garden in our apartment in Bangalore,
Oh my God.
right?
Oh,
Yeah, so that's the level of urban wildlife we have. So
okay.
that is what drew me into this. But again, these days cameras make it easier for you to click photographs. I just try to capture the moment and then that and write a good story about and background about the species, where all it is found, what is its behavior, and so on. And that gives me a lot of happiness. And yeah, I mean, I've clicked mainly birds, butterflies, and then snakes, and I'm kind of also interested in the herpetology. So yeah, yeah, that's kind of the motivation for me to do wildlife photographs.
Sure. I mean, I have seen those unique photos. Sometimes you capture some snakes and all. I have been scared of snakes, but when I see those images, how you click that excites me at times. Where whatever you are capturing. It's been a great conversation with you, Sundar. Very exciting, very invigorating, and I'm sure some of our listeners will be very interested in getting to know about you further as well. In case I have any questions, I'll be happy to pass them to you. Thanks for your time today.
Sure, sure, Aman. Likewise, it was really great talking to you, having this conversation, and especially in these times when we can't go out and meet
Yeah.
people, meeting you virtually and having this conversation useful. I'll be happy if people got anything out of this conversation, had any questions or whatever. I'll be happy to answer. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks a lot. Wish you a good afternoon. Have a great Sunday.
You too, Aman. See you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.